gold for its oil instead of US dollars. Reports suggest Iran's biggest customer, China, could follow suit. RT's Priya Sridhar is in New Delhi with more.
India actually has already bought Iranian oil using gold instead of U.S. dollars. And this is extremely significant because every year India actually spends 12 billion U.S. dollars on Iranian oil. And now actually Beijing is also saying that it might want to jump on board with New Delhi and also look into some sort of agreement with Iran to continue to get oil. New Delhi and Beijing actually account for 40% of the imports of Iranian oil. The EU only counts for 20%. Obviously, we've been talking about all week about this oil embargo that the EU announced on Monday that they're hoping to roll out and put into place by July 1st. And obviously, if New Delhi and Beijing find a way to continue trading with Iran using gold instead of U.S. dollars, this would severely hurt what the European Union and Washington is trying to do. Russia has also said that it wants to continue trading with Iran using domestic currencies instead of U.S. dollars. Obviously, the point of the EU oil embargo would be to bring Iran back to the negotiations table over its nuclear program. Obviously, Iran has said consistently maintained that this is a peaceful nuclear program. The West believes that they are potentially developing nuclear weapons. So in response to the EU's announcement on Monday that it will place an oil embargo on Iran, Iran has said that it's going to shut the Strait of Hormuz, which is actually where 20 to 30% of the world's oil supply shuttles through. And the United States has said it will absolutely not allow that to happen, even sort of alluding to the fact that it could potentially use military force to make sure that that strait stays open. Moscow has also said that sanctions are an obsolete form of sort of punishing a country and that it's actually going to be counterproductive. Another interesting thing to note here is that if Beijing and New Delhi continue to trade with Iran with gold, it's actually going to increase the value of gold and decrease the value of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency.
Let's talk a bit more closely about this and this deal between India and Iran and talk to Neil Padukone. He's a geopolitics fellow at the Taxashila Institution, is an independent Indian think tank, joining us on the line from New York. Thanks for being on our team, Mr. Padukone. The US then has been working to forge closer ties, of course, with China, with India and other Asian countries in an attempt to stabilise the region. But Iran's also a major player there. It's got its own supporters. What's behind Washington's actions?
Certainly, I think the issue of Iran's nuclear program is sort of the most recent point of divergence between the U.S. and Iran. But this also comes on top of years, in fact, decades of distrust and insecurity, stemming back all the way from the 1953 coup, in which the U.S. and Britain toppled the democratically elected leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and then thereafter the 1979 takeover of the U.S. Embassy, and then various support by the U.S. and Iran, respectively, of groups that oppose one another, whether it's the Mujahideen-e-Khalq or Jundullah by the U.S. or Hezbollah and Iraqi militants by Iran. And most recently, it's sort of the fact that Iran is flanked on all sides by U.S. allies to the north, south, east, and west. That I think accounts for a lot of this tension over the years.
Despite all the friction we're seeing, though, of course, the US and Iran do have some common interests as well. They both want a stable Afghanistan, for example. What is holding them back? Maybe a simplistic question, I don't know, but what's holding them back from finding a common language and ending this crisis? Certainly.
I think the biggest issue is just these decades of distrust. It's taking a lot of it would take a lot of political capital to sort of break beyond that. But at the same time, there are, of course, vested interests on both sides. In Iran, there are certain elements of the regime that actually base their power on anti-Americanism, whereas there are certain lobbies from Saudi and Israel, for example, in the U.S. who worry that a warmer relationship between the U.S. and Iran will actually come at their expense. And so we're sort of left with a situation where neither side feels that it needs to compromise, which winds up coming at a big cost to the rest of the world.
But why all this pressure from the US and Europe? Israel recently said that although it thinks Iran continues to improve its nuclear capabilities, it's not actually building nuclear weapons. Indeed, the IAEA didn't present any proof that Iran's nuclear program has a military slant so far. So why all this pressure on Iran?
Certainly. I think part of this has to do with that same long-term trust, but a lot of it also has to do with certain domestic political issues. For example, Iran has been one of the key foreign policy issues in the Republican debates in the United States. And as a result, there's been a lot of pressure from these interests within the U.S. to sort of ramp up pressure against Iran. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this action and talk over the last couple of weeks.
I wonder how this news about paying with gold instead of US dollars is going to go down in the US, i.e. Iran's got around it pretty easily.
Certainly. I mean, for years now, the U.S. has been trying to include other countries in its attempts to isolate Iran. And for a while, it was actually working because of its stringency. Countries like India, for example, were unable to invest in Iran because the companies that did would have been penalized by being shut out of American markets. And in fact, there was a big project, the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, that was opposed by the United States, and sort of it's essentially been scuttled. But exactly as you said, certain countries like India, Turkey, China, and even Russia are now looking for other creative ways to engage with Iran while insulating themselves from punitive action by the United States. And some of these actions include, as was discussed before, paying in gold rather than dollars, and also building new independent corporate entities that don't even participate in Western markets, so that they would be insulated from any penalties.
All right, Neil Patacone, geopolitics fellow at the Texas Schiller Institute in New York. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Now, we're gauging the reaction to the EU oil embargo on Iran on our website as well. We want to know what you think about this big story. Log on to RT.com to take part in our latest poll. So far, this is what you've been telling us. More than half of you think that China will buy all of Iran's oil at a cheaper price. A quarter of you telling us it's Europe's economy that's going to suffer. 18% say the embargo will make Russia the #1 oil supplier in the EU. The minority of you there, 4% this hour, tell us it'll hamper Iran's nuclear program. Go online, you can have your say.